Okay.
We don't as a city, but they have that.
Out at the
The
airport.
county and EMA coordinator has it.
Okay.
And then they
Okay, folks, it is 4 o'clock, and so we're on time kind of people, so we'll start on time. My name is Bob Ferguson, at-large city council person, and many people have asked me, and I myself have wondered, what exactly is our city policy with regards to immigration enforcement? So I thought the very best thing we could do is get together and have the two people who know the most about it, John Morrissey, our city attorney, and Jacob Smith? Joel Smith. I call you either Jacob or Joel. Joel Smith, our marvelous interim police chief, talking about our policy and what will happen should immigration enforcement come to our city. So, John and Joel, thank you very much for being here. And I'm going to turn the proceedings over to you, gentlemen.
All right.
And we'll have them speak, and then questions from the audience. I don't know that we can take, probably not questions from the live stream. No. Okay. All right. Good. So there's a chair in the front, and there's a couple more chairs you can pull around.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Can all of you hear me? How about try yours out, Joe?
Yeah.
Is this loud enough?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, we might turn up the gain here a little bit. Okay, go up and pass them around for the folks who need them. Can we? How about this? Here, okay, John? Why don't you?
All right, fine. As Bob said, the chief of police here, Joel Smith, and myself, as city attorney, we do have probably the most exposure to issues that would have to do with immigration. We don't have a lot of issues with immigration in town, although we have 90 nationalities. We're an international city. We have an international university in town, and we have many kinds of visas in this community. We've lived, I think, with a relatively peaceful arrangement as far as all of those things in various stages and steps the last 50 years that I'm aware of. And I guess as far as Joel and my exposure, we're only involved ordinarily with the immigration process if there's something that requires local assistance ordinarily. There is different cross-jurisdictional language in the state code that facilitates local law enforcement and local prosecution, which I am part of, to involve, and we can be requested to assist. Under city home rule, we are not mandated to assist. And it's not a matter of mandate. We want to do the right thing. If there's something that's glaringly illegal, we're not going to let it sit out there and go unaddressed. But the other side of that is there are policies, there are procedures, there are constitutional rights, there are things that are supposed to happen as far as protocols, both under state law and under federal law. And I'm supposed to be sort of a guidepost on that as far as things that are done locally under home rule. The chief of police directs a force of law enforcement officers that can assist. We also have a sheriff's department that can assist. And we've had some situations around the state in the last several months where, with what's been going on in other cities and other communities and other states, we've taken a close look at how that works with our own state laws, the federal laws. I will tell you that I have a background that started in federal court my first 3 years. I have involvement still as far as being licensed to go to federal court in the different courts of this state if necessary. I know some people in the immigration office in Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, and I do know that we have in this town, we have some immigration practitioners. We have a private practitioner in a law firm out in the industrial park. We have a couple of immigration lawyers over at campus in the admissions office. We used to have a very long-term immigration lawyer that just passed away that was a good friend of mine in the last 6 months, and his partner moved to Arizona. So a town of this size having 5 immigration lawyers in town says something about the amount of visa work and immigration work that goes on regularly. A couple weeks ago in the Des Moines Sunday Register, there was an article about 50 people who had been working at different stages of their naturalization process. One of them was a member from our community here that was sworn in. The story told a little bit about her in a paragraph that indicated it had taken her 8 years going through various steps and protocols to get to the point where she was sworn in as a naturalized citizen. And that says something about what, when you see things on TV or you read about them in the newspaper and you wonder how come some people don't have their visa current, or some people have been here for years and they're still not naturalized. I don't blame them. I've been a lawyer since 1971 officially, but I've been in law offices since 1968. And the law is not notoriously fast for getting anything done. I take that on myself. The immigration process, when I read in the paper that it took someone 8 years to get naturalized, I also know we're about 6,000 judges, administrative law judges and tribunals in the immigration system short. That's a lot of shortage. That would slow things down for months and years, and it has. In this community, we have both hands full of visa types. And you've had a chance to experience most of them. Probably you've read about some of it in your local newspaper. You've also probably seen some of it, but a few years ago we had 1,400 pundits that were here on religious and short-term visas that came out to Vedic City, stayed in double-wide housing, went to the domes every day. They had a couple of different arrangements where they could do 5 days a week or 7 days a week of contemplative meditation, praying for world peace and things that were part of planned programs, and they were here for months. At the end of that time, when their visas expired, I believe 1,400 of them got back on buses and went back to the countries they came from before they came out here for that event. That's a peaceful protocol using visas the way they're intended to be used with the Department of State and Immigration and Naturalization Services over their shoulder in a peaceful way. There wasn't anything in that experience that had people going around with submachine guns, with ski masks, with billy clubs, with things that required anybody threatening anybody. Now that's a few years ago. Now, we did have the Sheriff's Department out there as well as the Police Department on the grounds to make sure people did the things they were supposed to as far as loading up, doing the things that the federal parties expected to happen. But it all went peacefully. Now every year on campus we have a new influx of student visa holders, and they're here on condition, basically that they study, and they're here on condition that there's a school for them to attend. And those are things that are part of federal law. They're also part of campus rules. They're also part of things that you just take for granted. The student visa also gives rise to visas that have to do with people that move on to be associate teaching assistants. They have a work visa of a sort. There are other visas that have to do with specialized qualifications as far as learning. There are other visas that have to do with religious status. There are other visas that have to do with special qualifications that the State Department gives. And this isn't intended to be a comprehensive lecture on what visas are about. It's intended, though, to tell you that this town has some of everything, and we usually make it work pretty well. In the last 6 months, I've had somebody from ICE or INS or the U.S. Attorney's Office with somebody from the federal agency, and I call them an ICE person with a tie. And that's a play on words as far as a nice person with a tie. But anyway, that person that came in with a tie had a folder that was about as thick as my thumb, and it had to do with one person who was represented by a lawyer that was here until a while ago and then moved and is practicing in North Dakota. But she had an immigration case that was still going through one of the processes. And it was 2 or 3 years old, but it had a hearing coming up about 4 months out, and they wanted to notice somebody. This person isn't in the state anymore as far as the representing counsel, but the person is still here in the community that is represented. So I told the nice agent that had the tie on that we'd make sure that we located that attorney, that attorney made sure that affected person, as far as their immigration proceedings, was made aware, and that if they were going to do something back here with a in-town immigration lawyer, that they had a chance to do that over that period of time. Now that's just a day-to-day type of experience with some paperwork. And that's what it works out to most of the time. We don't have busloads of people in here with ski masks on. We don't have any reason to believe we're going to have that. We haven't anything like unrest with our campus. We do have people in town that like to speak out. This is a very, I think, expressive community as far as lots of things that show up as far as community opinion. I think there's lots of different opinions on both sides of the aisle as far as how immigration plays out, but as far as the campus being a factor in all of it, it very much is so. This community also has about 3 dozen that I'm aware of, and a few of them I count as clients of mine, people that have work visas, and some of them work over in Ottumwa, some of them work over at the Beef Pack, some of them have jobs that they've had for a decade or more. And those folks, I had a phone call from one of them concerned that the news in the Des Moines Register was that ICE, and this was people that I believe probably were wearing ties, but they were from ICE. They had just informed Meatpack that they were going to revoke 250 work visas. They wondered how that was going to impact them. And I said, well, basically you're entitled to get notice. You're entitled to have an opportunity in front of an administrative tribunal. You're entitled to not be detained. You're entitled to be given advances on anything that's happening if there's a reason for it to be happening, and you have a right to challenge that. And we'll refer you to somebody as far as legal rights and specialization in that field if you need that. Now, that's as far as I got on a phone call, but that is the way it works around here. If you've got something happening in advance that concerns somebody, that immigration is still a pending matter. This handout that is on the table was in response to some questions that we started out with originally. Our police department is a creature of statute and a creature of ordinance. Our police department and my office communicate about things. They have a policies and procedures manual that's as thick as a Bible, and it's full of good things like the Bible. And it's also policies and procedures that are updated regularly. And I think our policies and procedures, as far as our department, are about as current and as consistent with things that are going on nationally as anywhere. They're also consistent with Iowa policies on city home rule. So we believe we have local control over how our law enforcers act. They act in concert with what the city council hopes they'll do, and also what we believe our citizens would like to see them do. And that involves fairness to the people, whether they are a fully naturalized citizen or a person living in our community that isn't yet. Having said that, I don't know how many of you have had a chance to read through the handout, but the policies on there are about due process procedures, the idea that if somebody is in the spotlight as far as their immigration status, they're entitled to advance notice about the possibility of somebody acting. They're entitled to representation. They're entitled to a hearing. They're not subject to some of the things you probably hear about on the evening news. Right now, I will tell you, as an attorney that's been in the appeals courts, federal and state, and I've only had one case in my life in the Supreme Court. I don't care if I ever have any more in the Supreme Court, but I do care about the federal courts enough that what they're doing repeatedly and about 90% of the time is take a look at things that were passed. There were over 160 executive orders, either from the president's office or the Secretary of Homeland Security and her immediate assistants that have been challenged. And most of those, when I say 90% of them, were not treated as legal orders. That's where we start as far as our look at what we are being asked to involve in when they come into our community and they ask us to be part of enforcement. So far, we haven't had a busload of anybody with ski masks on. So far, we haven't had that situation except for a nice agent in a tie that I know of. I don't hear from the attorneys in town that specialize in immigration law, except if I need to call them up about something that just showed up. So from that standpoint, we haven't had anything where there's been a lot of running around saying that things are happening that never happened before. As far as our policies here at City Hall and in this community, believing in due process, that's been something the city has always believed in. As far as our police department respecting rules about detaining folks, warrants, searches, seizures, those are all things that we follow the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution, and our state laws on criminal procedure, and we're going to continue to do that way. There have been a few instances in the state so far where I would say things got politicized, Our Attorney General got in a shoving match with two sheriffs up in the Decorah area. One of the sheriffs said, well, we had a request from ICE. They came in and wanted the sheriff's department and the police department in the Decorah area, and then this spread over to the neighboring county, but they wanted them to assist in wholesale busload detaining of people. Some of the people were people with visas over at the college. Some of the people were there assisting with things at the college, but Decorah, for some reason, was singled out. The sheriff said no. He said, you don't have proper warrants. You don't have things that have to do with advance notice or due process. We don't have to do that. We're not going to obey an illegal order, even if somebody signed it in Cedar Rapids. It wasn't a judge's order. It wasn't an order in response to affidavits to seek a warrant, and he stood his ground. The governor and Jenna Bird, the attorney general, told him, well, if you're going to take that position, we're going to have to charge you with violating some rules we have as far as you assisting with federal enforcement. They did the same thing to the neighboring sheriff, and then it moved a little farther east over to Dubuque. And I happen to have a good friend over at Dubuque that's a classmate of mine that's their senior counsel in the city attorney's office. When they went into Dubuque, both the sheriff's department and the police department said, well, just because you say we have to do this and you're going to bring a bus and the troops in, doesn't mean we're going to assist you if it's not a legal order. And they stuck to their guns on that. They were threatened by the Attorney General and the governor with being declared a sanctuary city. And that's some of the talk that gets talked about up in the legislature about places that they don't think are cooperating enough. Well, I don't think we're a sanctuary city because we've got an international university, or we follow the Constitution, or we do the things that have to do with due process and the state code. And I don't think any of the other communities in the state under home rule think that either. So when that came up in Dubuque, and Dubuque said no, at that point, those three communities up there and the law enforcement in those areas basically said the only way this is going is we're going to have trials. And the sheriff in Decorah, he demanded a trial. At which point, guess what? About 3 months later, the Attorney General's office dismissed both sheriffs and withdrew the claim against Dubuque. That basically kind of showed the real story about the orders they were getting, which were signed but not by judges, demanding that local officials involve in the enforcement with the ICE guys that weren't wearing ties. So what you have right now, I will tell you, is aside from the handout and the discussion on there about policy questions and so forth, which we want to talk with you about, there is a gentleman in the legislature named Tyler Collins that has introduced a piece of legislation called House File 2041. I talked about this one night at City Council, but it's a bill that requires that our law enforcement will assist immigration agencies in their enforcement efforts once they are communicated to the local law enforcement. It doesn't clarify, it doesn't talk about how this affects home rule and the ability of the local community government to have a say in this, or our law enforcement, administrative personnel, and chief to take a closer look. So right now, House File 2041, I have a copy of it here. Basically, the whole thrust of it is that it's going to kind of repeat the things that the Attorney General of Iowa tried to do a few months ago, without authority and without valid federal orders. And at this point, it made it into the funnel at the State House. So my posture on this is in the interest of city home rule, local control, and due process. We should be telling Adrian Dickey, our senator, we should be telling Helena Hayes and Jeff Shipley, our representatives, this is not a complete bill. There need to be explanations, there need to be limitations, there need to be things that tie this to constitutionality and to rules that we live by the whole time. And it's not there right now. So that's my personal opinion on it, and I've been city attorney around here for 35 years. I'm pretty opinionated. So, you know, from the perspective of a new piece of legislation that somebody brought up that is politically popular, that isn't necessarily making it correct. And as far as our posture, as far as wanting to do the right thing, we have not turned down requests for assistance. I think if you have a conversation with our chief, he'll tell you that occasionally they get detainers. They are requests that may be accompanying somebody who also was arrested on a criminal warrant, but they also have a detainer for some other reason as well. And at that point, they take a look at it, and he'll tell you how they consider it. As far as things that go on in this community that have to do with federal funding and so forth, we aren't a sanctuary city. We haven't, to my knowledge, been threatened ever with federal funds being frozen or us being treated as unworthy of all of the programs available through the federal government. Or being shut off from things because we're non-cooperative. This community every year passes resolutions that adhere to about 20 federal policies for us to have available to us, things like our airport funding, our water and sewer assistance loans, different things that have to do with utilities generally and government operations generally. And we're more than willing to do what is expected under the programs that Congress enacts, that the state legislature enacts, as long as they're consistent with what we've always believed about how it's supposed to work. And when you get a group in here and we have people come up to the podium and talk and so forth, we want to hear what you think about whether that's really what's working right now. I mean, I've been talking now for about much too long.
Well, no, this is
so
really
anyway,
important information.
Yeah, I want you to feel that you can talk with us about questions about any of this so far that's been mentioned. So I'm going to shut up for a while, and Bob and Joel can say
Joel,
something.
if you could give everyone your perspective on it, I think that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I spoke with John. We really have not had any involvement. We haven't been asked to assist with ICE or any kind of enforcement, anything like that. Pretty much in the 15 years that I've been here, the only time that we've gotten involved with anything, and it's really not from a police department perspective, it's if we arrest somebody on a crime, we take them back to the jail, they have the option of putting a detainer on that person. And that has happened. The police department doesn't have anything to do with that. That all goes through the county jail and their system. So really from any kind of immigration enforcement, we haven't had anything that we've had to do on our end.
Okay.
They are already lawfully arrested, though, aren't they?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Well, good. Well, at this point, if anyone has a question or a comment, please come to the podium so we can get you on the recording and for the live stream, folks.
David Sands from Fairfield. Big question in my mind is, what do you do if ICE tries to detain someone improperly, that is, they don't have a warrant, a valid warrant for their arrest, and they're trying to cart them off, does the city stand to protect that person from illegal and unlawful activity?
Well, first of all, if you know enough about the circumstance of the individual to make a call, I would encourage you either to call the city attorney's office and tell us what you know, or call the police department and tell them what you know. At that point, if there is somebody in town that's walking around with a warrant, that warrant should be backed up either by an affidavit, application, or something that's been presented to a magistrate, a judge, or an administrative law judge before it ever got here with immigration. If it's not that way and they're acting without authority, at that point, if we're told they're acting without authority, we're not going to have our law enforcement people assist them. And for the most part, if they call and ask for assistance, I mean, if there's guys with ski masks on with a battering ram at the door, they don't have a right to do that. That's illegal, even if you saw it done on TV
And my
10
question is,
times.
would you stand in and protect those people?
All right, let's go a step farther. We can't advise you to interfere physically with them. In other words, you shouldn't get in their way in the doorway. The police are going to, at that point, if they believe it's improper, unlawful, unauthorized, their part of our policy is that they will go and safeguard our citizen from being abducted, from being in some way manhandled, in some way subjected to a situation where they're going to be accused of unlawful interference with official acts that turn out to be unlawful acts. But at that point, the least use of force is the policy of our police department. And so they're going to be in the doorway. They're going to tell ICE to go away. They're going to tell them that you come back with something. In the meantime, I'm going to be on the phone with a U.S. attorney or immigration in Cedar Rapids, probably asking, what do you think you're doing? This is our town, and you don't break people's doors down when you don't have something lawful. At that point, telling them that doesn't guarantee a result, but it does what we can from our perspective as far as a policy of compliance with what's lawful. At that point, there'll also probably be somebody on the phone with one of the local immigration lawyers, or I'm not going to say that the fact that we have a few immigration lawyers in town forecloses the possibility. There's dozens of immigration lawyers in southeast Iowa. There's more than dozens of them in the Des Moines area. And at that point, if we get somebody like that, the immigration lawyer is probably going to throw a term out on the table that tells ICE, you come back with a writ of habeas corpus from a federal judge, and we'll have a conversation about that. That's when you have a hearing and they deliver over the body or the habeas corpus, have the corpse here. And that's about as simple a process as you can go through in what they call federal equity. But if they aren't willing to do that, and they're just going to bowl their way around, our advice to our police officers are going to be, stay in the doorway. They don't have any right to damage property. They don't have any right to physically abuse people. And if they do, we're going to tell people, and it's part of our policies to tell people, document it. Get something recorded. Get something on your cell phone. Get something that was witnessed by the next door neighbor. Make sure that there are indications of what was going on and that it was excessive. At that point, That's about all we can do until we're in front of a tribunal. That could be anybody from our local magistrate upstairs at the courthouse, one of our associate judges or district court judges. It could go to Des Moines, either in front of an administrative law judge or all the way to federal court for that habeas corpus that I mentioned. So there's a lot of places to go. They all, unfortunately, they require some advance notice. They're going to give you a hearing time, and they'll give you an opportunity to be in there in front of somebody to make a decision, but that is always a day to 5 days later. It's always in front of somebody who has a record that they make, which means a judge and a court reporter or somebody that is documenting it. But it works that way. It's just, again, it's the legal process, slowing things down. It's sort of talking more slowly to get this through everybody's head.
I'd just like to check with Chief Smith.
Sure.
Are you prepared to stand in the doorway?
We would document it like John said. We're not going to physically interfere with any kind of federal investigation, though.
Can we clarify? It sounds like we're getting two different viewpoints on what's going, if the situation goes down, they don't have a warrant, you're called, the police are called, you say they're gonna stand in the doorway. I'm getting the feeling that you're actually maybe not gonna do that.
Well, it's possible he won't, because basically at a point in time, if it turns into a fist fight between a federal officer and a municipal officer, we don't want the fist fight. We want the officer telling the federal officer, you don't have authority and we're not going to assist you. Yeah. At that point, stand down. If two ICE guys lift Joel out of the doorway and tell him, back off, guy, we're taking this person regardless. If we document that, we show that to our judge or a federal judge or an administrative law judge, it should play out the same way every time. But that may be 3 days, 5 days later by the time we get due process.
Right. But Chief Smith, you will stand your ground as best you can?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Holden Hagerman from Fairfield. I moved to Fairfield about 2.5 years ago from Minneapolis. I grew up there, and I've actually spent quite a bit of time in Minneapolis this year. I have been face to face with federal agents and witnessed firsthand the flagrant abuses and constitutional violations. To piggyback off of the question that was just asked, something that I've seen come up consistently in Minnesota and Minneapolis, a sanctuary city, as we've talked about, is that these local law enforcement agents may not be directly cooperating and fulfilling the federal immigration enforcement, but what I have seen is the issue of crowd control. And this, I think, goes the next step beyond just standing in the doorway or telling them to back off and that they don't have a right to do this, is that commonly we see a crowd come when there is a raid going on, there's immigration enforcement going on, because people want to come and legally observe and document, as you suggested. And where we have seen what is questionably or controversially cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration agents is on the topic of crowd control. You have this crowd. Federal agents are getting, I'm trying to find the right word here, are maybe using force against them in a way that is not proper, is a violation of their First Amendment rights, or even Eighth Amendment rights, right? Our right to be free of cruel and unusual punishments. And then you see local law enforcement come to kind of control the crowd, suppress the crowd. And this in turn is actually giving federal agents space to violate people's rights. Oftentimes, if they're doing a raid without a warrant and local law enforcement comes to do crowd control and pushes the crowd back, this is cooperation with federal agents who are violating people's constitutional rights. So I would really love to see more explicit policy, or at least some answers here around the actual standard operating procedures around crowd control around an immigration raid or federal immigration enforcement actions. I'm curious if you guys have thought about this, seeing as it is kind of, like I said, like a downstream scenario from what the previous question was.
Think about it all the time.
Sure.
What you've got, when you say crowd, you have different circumstances where the crowd creates different kinds of circumstance problems. We have in our ordinances and we have in our state code and our constitutions the right of assembly. You can come in here on every other Monday night and you can ask the city council for permission to have an assembly. You can have a protest over in the square or wherever you want to have it, as long as it's organized and orderly. And that's perfect First Amendment exercise. It also, as far as what you see on television and the things you've experienced firsthand, it may seem like your local law enforcement that are managing peaceful assembly are also facilitating things that aren't lawful. And the problem is they don't make snap judgments on a lot of this stuff. If there's a bunch of people running around with papers in their hands, they're going to wait for somebody that is like me or a chief of police or somebody that's got the administrative authority to take the closer look to say, wait a minute, you are acting without authority. Sometimes that takes parts of days or longer to get that much sorted. As far as in the meantime, as far as the crowd management and so forth, you got everything from 100,000 people protesting in the streets up there, and the local police force being sort of overwhelmed but doing their best, to things around here. We've got a No Kings rally coming up, I think, in a weekend or two. And we've had a couple of gatherings of several hundred people in the past. Nothing particularly violent or flagrant about any of those. They were organized and they were orderly. That's the way you hope it works. As far as what we get into, as far as the spin-offs of that, though, as far as how does that facilitate something that is more of a violation, sometimes you don't figure that out for a day or two or three. As I say, our resources around here are kind of limited. We've got 3 lawyers that specialize that I know of in this community and some others in the area that could actually probably recite to you what part of the U.S. Code or what part of the rules and regs apply to what the immigration people can actually do. As far as the rest of us, we read, we do things that we're trying to be careful about as far as how far we can go or how far we can push back. And beyond that, though, as far as the crowd control mechanisms where ICE is taking advantage of it in some way, we would probably try to do everything we could to make sure that the people who are out there protesting, they aren't just what I call the reaction situation. I mean, if you got a whole bunch of officers and some of them are acting lawfully and some of them aren't, you expect the crowd to be documenting, you expect people to try to help people out of the situation if there's something bad happening. Nobody deserves to be beaten or shot ever. That's not the proper use of force, no matter how much law enforcement control you need in a situation. I think the chief would agree with me that our standards of lawful use of force, they've been defined for generations, and excessive use of force is not something that's any part of our policies here locally, and I don't think they are up in Minneapolis. As far as when we get to that question, though, as far as people that are holding themselves out as having authority they don't have, it's particularly awkward when you see a person that's a Homeland Secretary who now is being investigated about 50 different ways for orders that were given that obviously they weren't all correct, and executive orders that supported those. When you look behind some of that stuff legally, it may be years before we get to the bottom of some of the stuff that was contrived, that was based on something that they said supported it but really doesn't. And you're talking about the stuff of great legal briefs and so forth that are usually argued a couple of years after something hits the fan. So from that standpoint, I sort of have to apologize for the workings of the legal system and the legal review process. It comes after the things that take immediate action. So our policy is we try to avoid confrontation if we can as far as things that become physical. Our officers will try to safeguard property and the individuals in the property. There isn't any part of our U.S. Constitution, our state constitution, or our codified laws that lets somebody break down a door and go take somebody out of their house without prior good cause, and something that's been demonstrated by an affidavit sworn in front of a judge or a tribunal, and that grants authority where there isn't any before. The where there isn't any before is the key phrase. If there isn't that kind of authority, they shouldn't be there. And putting a mask on doesn't save them. Putting things in front of the group that's doing the acts as far as property damage or human harm, it doesn't save them. It will catch up with them. But in the meantime, we don't want to facilitate that. We want to try to have our citizens feel that there's something they can do as a mechanism to document, a mechanism to make aware, a mechanism to get, if we need to, an officer on the porch. And that might be about as far as we can go, though. We're probably not going to find any Attorney General's opinion in the history of our state that authorizes our officers to go out and get in fistfights with federal officers. It just doesn't happen.
If I could just leave a brief thought for you all to consider. The county that I grew up in, I was in the suburbs for most of my upbringing and moved to Minneapolis as an adult, was Hennepin County. Hennepin County Sheriff's Office is who is in charge now essentially of security at the Whipple building, which is the federal building that DHS is operating out of in the Twin Cities. And their official policies and what we've seen on the ground have been very disparate. They say that they do not cooperate with federal immigration enforcement, yet they are the ones that are essentially running cover for the federal agents in the place that they operate out of. And what I've seen with this, and what I would really hate to see happen here, is a degradation of trust with local law enforcement agents. Really, at the end of the day, we all want public safety. We all want people to feel like they can trust the authorities, like they can cooperate with them. And when we have them saying one thing and doing another, that erodes that trust. And so I would really just encourage all these parties involved to be as transparent and as clear as possible, and leave as many opportunities for review from the community if a scenario like this were to come up in our town. So, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts, and I'm sure that as far as what you'd like to envision as far as the trust for federal authorities would be more like the post office. You know, if your immigration nice guy with a tie was the extent of what you're usually dealing with, and it'd be the same person that might come out of the postmaster's office over at the post office building here in town. that's a different level of comfort than anybody gets from somebody wearing a ski mask. And I appreciate that there is a question of trust always when things get heightened that way. So we want to de-escalate. We want to try to get back to the point where you can trust people enough so you can have a meaningful conversation about what's wrong with this process or what else they need to do it right.
Yeah, Brandon Nelson from Fairfield. John or Chief, can you talk briefly about rights that citizens have to just film those kinds of events we're talking about?
Yeah, it's Iowa's single-party consent state. You can film law enforcement anytime, as long as you're, just watching yourself so you're not interfering in any kind of investigation that's going on or anything like that. As long as you're not impeding that, you have every right to record it.
Any way to define that in terms of proximity? I mean, I've seen films of cops just saying, "Sorry, you're impeding me. Get out of the way." There's
nothing in the code that outright defines what that is.
Okay.
I would say just follow their direction. If you're right in their face and you're in the way of where they're walking, that could be
Sure.
interfering with it. Just use your best judgment, use common sense, keep a little bit of a buffer between you and them, and you should be okay.
So we want to know. Thanks.
Hey, Leanne Hayes, Fairfield. I'm just slightly confused about the whole standing in the doorway conversation we had earlier. I'm having a hard time understanding the difference between a group of 4 or 5 masked thugs trying to kick somebody's door in and kidnap them versus a group of 4 or 5 masked thugs trying to kick somebody's door in and kidnap them without a judicial warrant. They're both a group of criminals. They're both violating the law. And I can't imagine in the first case, the non-ICE affiliated thugs, that anybody would say, "Oh, we don't want a fist fight. We can't say we're going to stand in the door. We can't promise you that." So what's the difference?
Well, if there's 4 or 5 thugs standing in the doorway and they're wearing masks, odds are we'll have more than an officer on the porch. And we'll probably have myself and somebody from the U.S. Attorney's Office talking about why there's 4 or 5 thugs trying to break into somebody's house down here. They have to be fairly grievous to, I think, cause that kind of a circumstance to begin with. If there's a criminal warrant and then there's immigration stuff going on beside, I would imagine that our own police department or sheriff's department would be carrying out the enforcement of the criminal warrant. The immigration side of things, the immigration people would be told, go out to the law center, sit down in the lobby, wait for the processes that have to do with the criminal enforcement to take place, and you can give us your detainer notice, and we'll have someone from the sheriff's or the police department talk to you about your detainer notice. Isn't that the way it works pretty much, Joel?
Yeah.
And at that point, there's no reason for them to be on the porch of that house with 4 or 5 masked men trying to break in if it's a criminal situation where there's a warrant that's already in play. If they're up there because, and I'm just going to pick on a house that I know from having been there occasionally, and they've got sometimes 3 or 4 extended families with a couple of them working over in Ottumwa, right here on near restaurant area. And if they go out there on a given day, there is probably, I'm going to guess, out of 4 extended families living in a house with 8 rooms, I'm going to guess that there might be one of them that has somebody there that's not fully documented. And whether that's their fault that they're not fully documented or something in the system that takes years, I don't care. As long as they're minding their own business, they're doing what they're supposed to as far as work and they're not violating our local laws, they can take the process through the steps, even if it takes them years to get naturalized. But if there's, kind of a fishing expedition to see who's over there that's got brown skin color and is part of that group of extended families, and we're just going to raid the house, you already know that's something that's wrong. That's not the way it's supposed to work. That's not our Constitution. That's not our city ordinance, our state code. And as far as what it would probably withstand if it was in front of a federal judge looking for the reasons that they did that to a whole house full of people, it would probably be treated as excessive by any judge. But that's after the fact, after it's reviewed, after it's been questioned and stopped.
Yeah, my concern is mostly in the moment when the violence is happening. Chief, you had made a comment that you couldn't promise that officers would stop ICE if they didn't have a judicial warrant. It seems as though the policy should be, we will stop them. These are our friends, our family members, our coworkers. We will stop them. And I'd like to know how your officers are being trained to step in and stop that illegal activity every time.
Yeah, well, both Joel and I adhere to something that if we were talking with Department of Public Safety in Des Moines, if we were talking to the U.S. Marshals, if we were talking to the U.S. Attorney's Office or the Attorney General's Office, we'd be dealing with something that when you put it on a certain level of classifications, it's all about chain of command. And those guys in the doorway with ski masks on, in the chain of command, they're not the ones giving the orders. So we would focus on who can we get to that puts a stop to this with an order in the chain of command. And that might be the U.S. Attorney. If it has to be a federal judge or something like that, like I say, that's going to take time. It never happens immediately. We don't have, even when you get something called a meantime restraining order, those usually take at least a minimum of either some consented, agreed to advance notice or notice of 1 to 3 days to get in front of a judge and have a hearing on something like that. Most of them are more like 5 days or longer. So those kinds of situations, as far as who has the ultimate authority, as far as tribunals and judges, that's a step way and up the ladder from the top of the chain of command. Joel's the top of the chain of command right here at the law center as far as his department. The sheriff across the hall is the top of the chain of command as far as who's going to have the deciding order at that building. But the ICE guys, somebody put them where your concern started, and somebody's going to be identified if we are talking with Cedar Rapids, and it's somebody at immigration, they're going to tell us who's in charge. If it's somebody in the U.S. Attorney's Office, they're going to tell us who's in charge or who we need to be talking to, because they want it to stop before it escalates into something that's bad press. And that is always bad press if we have to go that far. And then as far as the Iowa side, Department of Public Safety and so forth, you're talking about the head of the state patrol would probably be the head of their chain of command, but usually we don't have a lot of state troopers involved in federal enforcement that I've seen. So I'm anticipating this will be something that's either our police department or maybe on the outer edge, our sheriff's department, and that the chain of command that we know exists internally here would probably be able to find out from them who's your CO, who's got to be the one that tells you guys to step back a step. And at that point, if they don't have a CO, that's one more dereliction in the way that they're proceeding. But my expectation would be that you'd get it stopped fairly quickly if you're getting into whose authority in the end is authorizing this front porch group. So we don't want the front porch group to turn into an angry swarm. We don't want them to break up the house. We don't want them to hurt people as far as trying to remove people. We want them to listen to us. So conversationally, we're going to try to find out who is your commanding officer, who is the person in the chain of command that we need to talk to right now, and we'll take it the rest of the way as far as other people that have something to say about this, that have more authority than you. But it's never 100% effective to tell somebody, we don't care what you say because you don't have enough authority. That is not diplomacy at its best, and it's not what you see in a lot of these situations. They're people that are angry at each other, and we want the citizens to be reserved also to the point that we don't have people taking it into their own hands. If you have a crowd of 50 people converging on 5 guys on a porch, that could get pretty ugly. That could get into something where we don't want to take credit for what might happen to those guys. And the other side of it, though, is I guess there'll be somebody in the crowd that would say they asked for it, or there'll be somebody in the crowd that would say, well, they never should have come to town in the first place. But those are decisions that are made outside of our jurisdiction, and that's part of the key to this is the jurisdictional questions. We never have all the answers on the jurisdictional thing usually until we figure out who's really behind this. Is it somebody out of state, Kansas City, Washington, D.C., someplace like that that's still calling shots? Is it Cedar Rapids? Is it Des Moines? Is it somebody that we know versus people that we don't have any clue about? But I mean, your question's very well taken.
I appreciate your answer. I was really hoping to hear more from you, Chief. In a situation where masked thugs are at someone's door illegally, they do not have a judicial warrant, you are called for help. How are your officers trained to answer that call and to serve and protect? That's every member of the police force has taken a vow to serve and protect the members of this community. How are your officers being trained to do that, and can we get a commitment that it's going to happen every time?
We haven't had this conversation in our police department. This is...
So when will that happen, and how?
I've started speaking with John about this.
Wonderful.
This is something that's fairly fresh. I mean, in my 15 years in law enforcement, we've never had these kinds of things that have happened in the past. There's a lot of focuses on our police department with a lot of things that are going on. Things that we've had kind of a passing of the torch with the chief passing away. There's a lot of things happening in our police department now that we need to figure out. This is a conversation that we can certainly have. Of course, I would want to sit down and talk with you folks before I sit down and have a conversation with our officers, just to see what is the thoughts of the community. What is it that you folks are looking at before we sit down and have those talks within our department.
My personal thoughts go back to my initial question. I feel that somebody trying to illegally kidnap someone should be treated like someone trying to illegally kidnap someone by the police.
Okay.
And I would be happy, as I'm sure many others here would be, to sit with you and help make a policy so that you can train your officers to serve and protect everyone in Fairfield.
Okay.
Hey, it's Michael Dearborn, Fairfield, Iowa. I think anonymity is a huge issue here. We've seen it. I'm not sure we still know who killed Alex Petty. Do we know who actually shot him? They found okay, but I know. It took him a while, though.
It didn't happen at the hands of the federal government.
Yeah, not at the hands of the federal government. And so we've seen that Denver City Council has passed an ordinance to ban mask usage for law enforcement. Have you thought about doing that here? I know it's early here. They're not at our doorstep or anything, but any plans on that? Thoughts on it?
Is that punted over to the city council?
Yeah.
At this point, I'm frankly not in a position to give you an informed opinion about that, Michael. One of the reasons I thought it was important for us to be here and have this conversation is not that I think, personally, that we're in any imminent danger of truckloads of ICE folks descending on Fairfield. On the other hand, if we don't have the and this is a hard conversation, there's not a lot of real easy answers. If you're talking about a federal force with all of the gravitas of a federal force, and that federal force perhaps in many cases not following the law, that is somewhat uncharted territory. And that's something that we need to have honest dialogue about that and know honestly what our police force of 14, 15 guys and gals can actually do. So this is not a cut and dry thing, because this is not something which is rule and law based completely. It is this activity. I mean, the essence of the questioning, I think appropriately, is that what happens when things are done by authorities that they're not operating within the framework of the Constitution and laws. And that is something we need to wrestle with. That's the best I can do right now. But this is the first step of wrestling with it.
Right. Good luck with the wrestling. Thank you.
Wrestling match. Okay.
Hi, Diane Rosenberg. So my question is, we've been hearing a lot about what's happening, citywide. Do you have any sense of where the county may fall, in terms of the policies that you're, telling us about today? Has there been any discussion between the city and the county? And it's making me think we have to also have a conversation with the county as well. But I'm wondering what may or may not have taken place in terms of city and county policies. Are we on the same place or not?
I've had limited conversations with an assistant county attorney. We have an assistant county attorney on our council, and I've had limited conversations with the county attorney, but there isn't anybody officially taking a position yet over at the county. It's one of those scenarios where, again, it's kind of like the chief looking at it as far as training officers for something that we haven't had happen before. Same story on the county side. The county, I think, has the same policies as us as far as expecting due process, expecting advance notice, expecting appropriate hearings, expecting things that are consistent with the Constitution. So I don't think I'm speaking out of school and saying that you'd get this letter from them. But the rest of the story on that is the county probably has more instances where if there's a criminal arrest, there's the possibility that there might be something else from immigration with a detainer. However, I don't know anything about the nationalities as far as statistics on who's getting arrested the most, or how many times there's something that has to do with a visa status at all. So I don't know that gives you much comfort as far as what we can tell you from their posture, except I'm comfortable that they have the same prosecutorial code of ethics that we have on the city scenarios, that we have on the state scenarios for prosecutors. And so you'd expect them to adhere to the ideas about due process and so forth. This whole idea that anything can happen real quick is still the most troubling, because when these people that haven't been there in the past show up on somebody's porch with masks on and a battering ram, it's a first instant situation in our community. If something like that happens, our police are going to try to protect private property. They're going to try to tell them, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be here. We're right now trying to get somebody with higher authority to order you off. And that's the way it should be handled as far as the chain of command. As far as the circumstances at the time, you don't know what's going through some of the, I know television spends a lot of time talking about how poorly trained some of these masked agents are. That's not our law enforcement. Our law enforcement is academy trained. They're very competent. They know the law. If you ask Joel, he will have an answer on how that works, and so will his officers. The same story over at the Sheriff's Department. They know how it works. So we're comfortable in our skin as far as our local law enforcement knowing what's supposed to happen, what's supposed to come down, and so forth. The people that on that front porch situation might not necessarily. So we can't guarantee you that, Diane. I wish that I could tell you a better situation than that, but it's a good question.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, so, the city has this home rule, structure. The county, I'm assuming, doesn't have that.
Now, the county has home rule also.
Oh, it does, okay.
Same year that they did it for towns, they did it for counties.
Okay.
And one of the things I'd urge you to, if you get a chance to talk to your state senator or your state representatives, which I suspect you do sometimes.
Sometimes.
This House File 2041 that wants to mandate that our local law enforcement has to assist immigration enforcement. No questions, no exceptions. It's a bill right now that needs a lot of work. We don't disagree that there is a reason for some immigration enforcement everywhere. There always has been. But the way it's been done in recent months and years isn't what was intended by the way it's structured and the way it's been defunded as far as some of the things that would help people that would otherwise benefit with citizenship, and the way it's been kind of overridden by parts of it ignoring procedures, parts of it being driven by the only thing I can characterize it as is hate. Those things are not part of our body of law. They're not part of what we believe in as far as our citizens' rights and our constitutional rights. So, saying that, but then looking at bills like this is right in the face of local rule. This is right in the face of county and city home rule. And this particular piece of legislation doesn't care. And at some point in time, there are a few pieces of legislation every spring that attack city and county home rule. And every year we look at those things and we feel some erosion. More recent years, we've had things that have to do with city and county home rule, that have to do with the way we budget, the way we determine our property valuations, things that are about as local as they get, in which we expect people to come up to the podium and talk about something they're unhappy about locally. The state legislature doesn't know one valuation from another as far as this community, but I guarantee you, if you're probably keeping track down in your own neighborhood about whether all the residential values went up or out at the village, whether they all got summarily added a percentage, that's enough to come in and talk to the people here locally. It's enough to go to the assessors board. It's enough to go to the board of supervisors, and they'll listen. I mean, that's grassroots. That's the idea here, and that's local rule.
So on this House File 41. I looked it up, and it doesn't look like it has passed. So did it change numbers? Because that's what I was curious about. Because it got stalled. So if that, is there like another, did it get, sometimes they renumber, and it's really hard to follow at the state legislature, and that's,
Well, let's see, what can I tell you about it? It's a bill by Taylor Collins. My understanding is it made it through the funnel, but it wasn't, they didn't consider everything about it complete as far as the exemptions that they were going to add. And that's, once it's in the funnel, though, the next thing is weeks of debate. And you don't get debate if nobody's talking about it, though. And I don't know if Jeff Shipley's very well informed. I don't know what Adrian Dickey knows about it. And I think probably one of the people that was paying attention to some of this earlier was Helena Hayes. So maybe start with Helena and work on the other two fruits of the vine and see if there's a way to make sure that they understand this isn't very good legislation and it doesn't do anything for us locally.
thanks so much.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Terry Phillips. Thanks for having the forum. I think it's very useful. In your document that you put out, you said, do not physically intervene or interfere. Leave this to local authority, compliance review by police or the attorney. And that is someone is trying to enter a business or a home. So are you saying that an individual cannot protect themselves or others in their house if someone attempts to enter the premise?
You mean inside the house?
If they come through the door, can we stop them? You spoke about the rights we have.
You can't follow the masked guys into the house and
If I'm
try
in the
to
house,
drag them out of the house. If you're in the house with the occupants of the house, at the invitation of the occupants of the house,
no,
you can
no.
certainly stand your
If
ground.
they knock on
inside
my
the
door
house.
and say we're coming in, can I stop them?
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't say
Let me
that.
see your warrant.
Okay, they don't show you your warrant.
All right, I'm calling the police. You
Okay,
don't have a
what-
warrant, you don't touch my doorknob.
Okay, what will the police do then, Chief?
We would have a conversation with them, document it like John said.
Okay.
Again, go ahead.
In the meantime, though, from what we've read and seen up in Minnesota, there's no time to do that. Now, John, you and I are pretty much the same age, and we're not going to take a whole lot of people down. But we might try. I want to know
right.
if I'm going to get the heck beat out of me, that I've got the right to try to stop the people coming in. I don't want to wake up and have someone say, okay, we're taking you to jail because these guys were right.
Now, you still, the old adage is a man's home is his castle, that's still the law.
And that's what I want to make sure.
Yeah, you
I
have
don't
to
want to put anybody
respect
in-
the warrant.
I don't
If
want
they
to put
don't have a
anybody-
warrant, you don't have to.
Okay.
Period.
And community law enforcement is a key to what we have here. I want to trust you, and I want to trust that when I call you, hopefully I never have to, that you're going to come and help me. You don't have to take my side. You just have to help me.
Sure.
Okay? All right, thank you.
Gregory Connor, Fairfield. He kind of stole my thunder with part of my question. That's all right. Can you please clarify? I watch a lot of podcasts and things about this subject, and can you please describe the difference between a judicial warrant signed by a judge and an administrative warrant, which has been explained on the podcast that an administrative warrant is not a legal warrant. It has to be a judicial warrant signed by a judge, not just a warrant that's an administrative. I've heard that that is not legal.
You're right. What you've got, and it's part of the illegality of some of the people in some of the positions, at Homeland Security. If it goes out in the form of a warrant, but it's signed by Joe behind the desk that is not a law-trained judge that's hired as an administrative judge, the difference starts right there. If he's an administrative judge, he's a law-trained, certified, sworn-in judge that works for the Department of Immigration Services, and he's intended to issue that kind of warrant, and the federal code says so. If he's somebody sitting behind a desk and they wanted a bunch of stuff that you can put in somebody's face and they're calling it a warrant, but it's not an administrative warrant signed by an administrative law judge, that's the starting point. We have judicial levels on the state side and on the federal side also. The federal and state side both have one level of judges called magistrates. They're still full-fledged law-trained judges that are sworn in. We have mid-level judges, and we have the judges of the district court on the state side, the federal district court judges, appellate judges, and so forth. They all have the authority to issue warrants that are enforceable, lawful warrants that we would talk about in the same sense as that administrative law judge that is a law-trained, full-fledged sworn-in judge. Those are the documents that have authority, that have thrust, that are supposed to be obeyed and are supposed to be respected. Things that are coming out on paper that look official and they got a big seal on them and they got other stuff. I just received something in my office this afternoon that was created by a member of the Republic of the State of Iowa, and it's a sovereign citizen document, which I receive one every month at least, that's unique looking, but it ain't no legal document. And what it amounts to is some of the agencies that have their administrative personnel doing a certain level of signing things and making it appear that that's an order. I mean, they can give an order to these guys to go out and enforce as fully as possible in Fairfield the code, and that might be on a piece of paper, but that's not a warrant that authorizes you to specifically go into a property, deal with a specific person's interest, do it because you have reasonable cause or a showing on an affidavit that entitles you to do that. That's our constitutional protocol, and at that point, everything breaks down if it's the difference between law-trained judging going forward as far as all of those things that happen, and the chief and the law enforcement officers at both the sheriff and the police side, they're used to seeing warrants, and they're used to seeing things signed by magistrates as well as district court judges on the state side. Same story if you're a U.S. Marshal, you'd see the same thing for magistrates and district court judges on the federal side. But the administrative law judges, you'd probably look twice. And you'd want to see, is that, yeah, and you know, if it's identified as Administrative Law Judge Joe Peterson from the Cedar Rapids Administrative Office of the Department of Immigration, and it appears to be all of the things and the whistles and the bells and the seals that go along with the expected order appearance. Maybe that is a valid order, but you're also, you know, if you give it to me, I'm probably going to either call back to the Immigration Department or I'm going to call the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I'm going to find out if there's something about that that's fishy. And for the most part, most people in those higher levels of the chain of command know that that's actually a crime to dummy something up and try to misrepresent a legal enforcement document. It's also a crime under the state code, and I know at least one person in this community that signed a forged judge's signature to a document that gave some enforcement power. 7 years, 7-year sentence over that. That's a serious violation for people to do that. So there is something, it's a big distinction as far as valid warrants, enforceable warrants versus things that are coming down as far as administrative orders on paperwork from people that may have control and management, but they aren't officers of the court. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, for the most part. It's pretty much a can of worms. But, okay, so moving on from that, let's say have a case scenario. I'm in my home, and the scenario is being recorded. Both my daughters behind me, they have their cell phones on. I'm at the front door talking to people wanting to get into my home. And they have masks on, and I don't know who they are. They don't have any paperwork. They use a battering ram, and they force their way into my home. Being new to Iowa, I think you call it the stand your ground law. I don't know.
Castle doctrine.
What is it called? The castle doctrine? Okay. So if they enter my home, they have no paperwork. My daughters are filming the whole thing, and there's no police there yet. And I shoot them and I kill them in my home. They've entered the home, and I shoot and I kill them. Will I be held liable for protecting my family?
We ain't Texas yet. we're not Texas yet. They've had some stand your ground cases.
We're not the Texas of the North.
Have
Please tell
been
me
to the Texas
that.
Supreme Court, and I don't think they've convicted anybody for standing their ground. But our state Supreme Court hasn't had to deal with that. So, but we would discourage use of force, use of weapons. You have a right to protect your home, and obviously, if these people are holding themselves out as government, you probably treat them different. If they're there with masks on, but you know that they're government, you probably still are stretching it to shoot them. If you are aware that police are on their way, our recommendation would be patient. They'll get here. If you're documenting this, it's as easy. I mean, if they seize you, it's as easy as going in front of a federal judge and asking for habeas corpus to have you released for being illegally abducted from your home. And habeas corpus is something I've used a few times 50 years ago when people from an Indian reservation I worked on were seized by state officers, and I had to go get them out of state holding facilities at Sioux Falls, the other side of the state. But habeas corpus works in federal court almost immediately. So it's one of those things. If the worst thing happened to you like that, it would be life-altering if you shot somebody in your doorway to protect your doorway versus having to fight it out in front of a federal judge a day later. I would always advise you, be patient, trust the federal system to honor that. Habeas corpus has been around since King John, and it's a valid, equitable remedy that gets you out if they don't have a valid reason for what they just did to you. So that shouldn't happen to you, and there is a remedy that is not as severe as what would happen. I mean, even if you have valid defenses, even if you have all of the things that are probably going to make up an interesting jury trial, I never encourage people to ask for a trial. You have that right, but if you put yourself in that position, it's a couple years of your life, and it's just it's a hard pill to swallow if you have to do that because of something that maybe waiting a few hours and working the system as it's supposed to work gets you through it instead. So, and I mean that. I've defended some people, used habeas corpus sometimes, and I've had some people in death cases, and I know that there's a lot riding on it if you have to go that route by using a weapon. So we would discourage that as an excessive use of force, probably even though you're defending your own home. And probably at that point you come up against questions that you don't know the answers when, if they're forcing their way in and they're roughhousing and manhandling and that kind of stuff, that none of them may have their guns drawn. That's the other story. If you're shooting somebody that's not shooting at you first, there's a standard of reasonable force that also comes into play. And
like what happened to the people up in Minneapolis.
oh,
Shot in the
I
face
watched that and I was appalled.
It's
yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah, never excusable. Yeah. And that's not the standard of reasonable force that our force follows, period. We very seldom have somebody that draws a weapon. Wouldn't that be true, Joel?
Mm-hmm.
Let alone, I can probably think in the last 40 years that I'm remembering probably maybe 2 or 3 situations where our law enforcement officers actually shot somebody. Most of the time, they may show up at a shooting, they may disarm a person, but most of the time they abhor the use of weapons on citizens. So, I think that's a fair comment.
Very good. So instead of getting out a gun, I'll just get out my slingshot and a metal ball. Stop right there. All right. Thank you.
All right, you bet.
Hi, Maria Brickner. My husband and I moved here about 3 years ago from Texas. So growing up, born and raised in Texas, I lived in the Rio Grande Valley. I don't know if anybody knows where that is. It's about 20 miles away from the border. I was raised on a lot of stories where my dad would say that they would just pick up people because of the color of their skin while they were walking down the street. When I first moved here, I worked here in Fairfield, in Mount Pleasant, and in Ottumwa. Since Trump got elected, I decided not to go to Ottumwa or to Mount Pleasant. And I'm in healthcare, mental health care. So I stay here in Fairfield. I don't feel comfortable driving on my own. So my husband, he takes me to work every morning, picks me up every night. So now, knowing things that happened when my dad was growing up, firsthand, everything that happened to him, that they would just pick him up because of the color of their skin. And if I'm with my husband and he tries to defend me, are you telling me that they could shoot him and it'd be okay?
Oh, no.
But we don't have the time to call the judge or to find a police officer. And I honestly believe, and I saw it coming when he got elected. I saw it coming. That's why I stopped going. It's not going to stop at just people that are not here or that are here illegally. There's a lot of people that have been arrested that are here legally. They were born here and are kept in jail for a long time. So what? I kind of came to this meeting to find out, do I need to go back to Texas? Because I'm not going to get protected here by the police. Because in Texas, there's a lot of Hispanics. And I know that if someone tries to take me, my family's going to stop them. But not here. I have my husband and our kids.
In fairness, in Texas, I know that there are some large organizations that are doing immigration defense work. It hasn't been So much so here in Iowa because we haven't had as much of that enforcement types of controversy that Texas
I
has.
understand that, exactly, but you're talking about time. You're saying give us time to go through the process. No, there's a man in Texas that got arrested on the 13th and died on the 14th. He was in ICE detention.
We've
Not
had
there,
we've
but
had hundreds of people die in ICE detention, and we've got an administration that wants to have 20 million people in prisons.
exactly.
And that's a policy question that voters in the country are going to have to address again this year. And that much detention is the most in the world. That's not what the United States used to stand for, but as far as your fear of it and whether we're going to do it or not and the expense of it and whether the taxpayers figure out that this is probably one of the worst solutions ever, that's politics. That's something that you have to get out and you have to be active about the way you view it and what you want to see happen and who you want to promote.
What about checkpoints? Am I safe driving to Ottumwa or to Mount Pleasant with my husband? And can they just, if they ask me, are you an American citizen? Can I just say, who are you to ask me? And at that point, do they have the right to detain me? And if they try to do that, I know my husband's going to try to protect me. Or I could protect myself. Because I do have the capability of doing that.
I don't know if I can speak to Wapello County having checkpoints. I'm not aware that we've had checkpoints in this county.
That's coming.
Well, we have a little bit to say about whether it comes to this county or not.
Well, and that's kind of like what I was, okay, I'm glad you said that. You have some point. But the police department hasn't even talked about it. He's been wanting to do this before he even got into office. And you haven't talked about it? And then you say, oh, we just had a death? Our chief just died? Seriously?
This might surprise you, but a lot of things that get talked about in Washington, D.C., when we're here in council, we don't even consider talking about them, either because we think that's a really bad idea, or we don't agree with that, and that's not our policy, and that's not our local belief, and that comes under local control. If our police department or our sheriff department combined with, or maybe the highway patrol is in on it too, and we think we have a public safety issue that is so severe that we are going to get out and have checkpoints around the county doing things for enforcement, I'm going to make a couple of exceptions. We have had occasional holiday checkpoints for OWI drivers over the years. I was county attorney here for 18 years, and I know sometimes they tripped the trigger. There were many people that were driving that shouldn't have been on the holidays that had too much beverage. But other than those kind of checkpoints, you know, a public safety group out watching out for other kinds of violations, I haven't seen it, and I've been county prosecution 18 years. I've been city attorney for 35. It's not in this county or this city in my lifetime. So, you know, I want to assure you that if that was presented, it would be fully discussed with our city's public safety committee. Our law enforcement would be there discussing deeply, and we would involve our county attorney and our sheriff's department in the discussion also. So, but that hasn't shown up here, and it hasn't, to my knowledge, been something that's been suggested as a topic for consideration around here. Now, we've got a campus with 90 different nationalities on it, so if somebody wants to make an issue about visa status and so forth, that's still a story for the last 50 years in this town. We've got an international university. I just talked to the president of their board of trustees this afternoon, and campus is pretty comfortable that the visa stuff out there in 4 or 5 different categories is working the way it's supposed to. We don't have somebody over their shoulder in Des Moines or Cedar Rapids concerned that we don't operate legally here in town as far as the paperwork side of things. So that's one step ahead of some of the people that say that we're just flagrantly ignoring what our responsibilities are. We don't flagrantly ignore our responsibilities. I wouldn't tell our chief of police, and our chief of police wouldn't agree with me if I said ignore immigration law violations that are obvious. But the other side of it is there are many things that aren't obvious, and if they're not proven and they're not shown, we're not out looking for that scenario just because somebody says, I'll bet you. And at that point, the discriminatory part of that as far as skin color and so forth, that's not what's happening in Iowa. Iowa hasn't had a history of that constitutionally ever.
So Fairfield, because they do have the college here.
Yeah.
Why hasn't the police already talked about this? Why?
We haven't had.
Then you're not thinking about your people. You're just thinking about certain
Oh, on
people.
the contrary, we think about things every month. We have committee meetings every month. When these things come up with legislative proposals and things like that, we talk about it every 2 weeks at city council. I try to throw the things in from the news.
How many times has it been talked about?
How much has this been talked about? A couple times at a couple council meetings for this particular bill. But that's about the extent of what anything else gets talked about. And then maybe if I'm lucky, 2 or 3 people had heard about it. Maybe one of them went and said something to one of the state representatives. Maybe one of them said something to our state senator. And that's about the flow of conversation out of our grassroots discussions. But believe me, we do talk about stuff.
I think it's important to understand that at some point there is a trigger that starts a conversation that could have started before, but may not have started before. And this is our start of conversation that will deal with issues like this. And again, as we've said in a number of different ways, this is an unprecedented situation. It's not something where there is a clear delineation of rule of law, or we wouldn't be having the conversation we're having right now. So I think that's the best that any one of us as public officials can tell you right now. The conversation has started, and we will wrestle with issues, and these are difficult. These are very difficult, very unclear in terms of where all the boundaries are. I mean, there's some boundaries are extremely clear, some not so clear, just because of we're normally used to the rule of law. Well, if you want to know what's happening, you look at the code, you look at the ordinances, you look at the police manuals. If there are elements in the entire structure of what's happening that are outside the law, and I think that's really the elephant in the room, that's the issue that is concerning. So all I can say is that whatever the past is past. We can't remediate the past. We are in the conversation now, and we will stay in the conversation. And we really, I personally appreciate you, all of you, being here. Everyone who has expressed an opinion, even people who have not expressed an opinion. If, as a community, sometimes we're called to deal with things that are ambiguous and things that we don't choose.
I think that if you want to know how things are going to happen, is you just got to look at history. Because this is history repeating itself. So,
Well,
thank you.
Yep.
I thank you.
I know I was already up here before. I kind of jumped in on something that was pertinent at the moment, but I had some things I was hoping to share, and I know that things are waning a little bit, so I want to keep things brief. But I have a lot of thoughts about the list of the 4 points around the policies here. One thing that I've seen or heard consistently talked about here is the language around administrative law judge warrants from an immigration tribunal. And my understanding is that this is actually distinct and different from a judicial warrant, because administrative law judges work for the executive branch, and that is an executive tribunal, whereas state judges, federal judges, district courts, those warrants have to do with criminal court and are judicial warrants. So I would love to see, on the point of A, language that makes more clear distinctions between administrative warrants and judicial warrants. I think that it has quite a bit of ambiguity at the moment, and some clarity there would be really, really amazing. Beyond this, for points B and C, I don't think that they necessarily constrain local action because ICE's internal processes are where due process violations are largely happening. It's not necessarily always at the point of apprehension. You're talking about things taking time, getting in front of judges, etc. This is where a lot of the due process violations are really happening is we have someone that's taken and, well, we need to find them. Oh, we can't find them. They've been moved despite orders to keep them in state, things like this. So my ask on points B and C would be that we specify that local authorities will not extend detention beyond the time that a person would otherwise normally be released solely for immigration purposes, unless there's a judicial warrant or a court order that independently authorizes that continued custody, and that we require prompt release when local criminal grounds end, and make ICE really come to the doorstep with a judicial warrant if they want someone or want us to keep someone.
Yeah, you're partly right and you're partly not, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
I understand.
Some of it comes down to jurisdiction and U.S. code versus our code. The judicial warrants, you talk about whether it's federal court or whether it's state court, different levels, those are all something that are always enforceable, and they're always something that we honor. The administrative law judge warrants, when I say it's jurisdictional, there are things in the U.S. code that an administrative law judge warrant specifically directed at a particular point or purpose may have more teeth than something out of the courts. For instance, a whole bunch of people on a plane being flown to El Salvador on an administrative law judge say so, that would probably be enforceable. Or if an administrative law judge says, no, you can't do that, our system is going to keep that person in the country, and then it's ignored, and they do what we saw happen with a plane load of people back in the early days of the executive orders, and they ignored that administrative law judge order. That administrative law judge order was actually very highly enforceable. So there are situations under the federal jurisdictional standards that actually are probably as high or more highly enforceable than our state court and federal court things that are general rulings.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to particularly the language around administrative warrants, because obviously, like, some of these things are just signed by, as you've said, nice guy with a tie behind the desk, and this is obviously distinct. I think that point A just isn't necessarily making these distinctions as clearly as they could, not only so that individuals of the community can understand their own rights when presented with these types of documents, but also so that our own law enforcement agents that are local to the community can be more clear about what types of documents, warrants have a legal weight behind them and what doesn't. Right. I'd like to just move on to my last couple of points for posterity here. If you need to review at a later point, please do. I think that the last point, D, is promising to see that we have some talk about transparency, but I would like to see a little bit more teeth and more transparency to it. I think that some potential improvements that could be made to this point are requiring that any ICE request, whether it's a detainer, a warrant, a subpoena, a phone or email request, be reviewed by a designated legal counsel or a supervising official that's trained on constitutional standards and not just line staff. Mandate of written documentation for each request and that legal basis for any cooperation with aggregate public reporting, such as quarterly stats, the number of requests, the type, and whether these are honored or not, and explicit statements that local agencies will remain responsible for complying with the Constitution and can be held liable for unlawful holds. I think something along the lines that our policy should say clearly that we don't just take ICE's word that something is constitutional, that we independently verify, and most importantly, publish what we are doing and that verification. And lastly, I think that the policy really talks a lot about what it does allow, but it really doesn't talk a lot about what it doesn't allow. I think it would be very helpful for the community and trust in local law enforcement to spell out that there will be no arrests, stops, or questioning based solely or primarily on perceived immigration status or place of birth. This is largely known right now as a Kavanaugh stop. There will be no honoring of ICE detainers or administrative warrants alone as grounds to extend someone's jail stay beyond when they would normally be released, absent a judicial warrant. No participation in civil immigration enforcement operations, such as raids, home operations, or workplace operations, based only on administrative documents, as well as no use of local resources, such as jail space, which I know has to do with the county, but also officer time, to enforce purely civil immigration law, except where required by a court order that meets constitutional standards. I think that these things would really, really help out with just fleshing out this policy. I really am grateful that we have something here that we can look at and we can scrutinize, but I think that it really is only just a start. I think that there's a lot more that could be done in regards to this. So, yeah, thank you. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Okay, one more, and I think we'll call this a wrap.
Good evening, and thank you for giving people the opportunity to talk to you and present questions and get answers. My name is Randy Cooksey. I live in Fairfield, Iowa, and we're a nation of laws, and as a society, that's how you should function. It's hard for me to picture, with the scenarios that were given, that law enforcement would just show up in ski masks with a battering ram to knock down someone's door without having some type of lawful order or a lawful reason to be there, and not identify themselves as some type of a law enforcement agency. And they were some questions presented about what would our local law enforcement do to prevent a unlawful entry into a home. If it's by another law enforcement agency, I don't think we'd want to get to the point where we pit our local law enforcement against state or federal authorities. I'm sure that there is something in the department's policy and procedure manual as to how an officer should conduct themselves if they are giving an unlawful order or having been given an unlawful order. And I think that that would probably apply in handling that situation. I would also, lost my chain of thought here. I'm sorry. I lost my chain of thought. I think, like the situations in Minnesota, not living there, but just from what I've watched on TV, I think the big issue there was the lack of cooperation and communication between the federal authorities and local authorities. I think the immigration officers that were wanting to take people into custody had been through the due process. There had been orders given for detention and deportation, and that they were there to pick those individuals up. But the situation got to where local authorities wouldn't cooperate to help with the crowd control, to lessen the violence that got to the level that it was. My question would be, if ICE is here and they have a lawful deportation order and that they're trying to take an individual into custody, would our local authorities work with ICE in order to make sure that that environment is safe for the ICE officers and for the public? Because we do know that emotions can get very high on topics that people feel strongly about. And so I'm asking what the local law enforcement would do in a situation like that.
As a general rule of thumb, yes, everything is kind of on a case-by-case basis, depending on what's going on. But if there's a legal warrant and it's there, there's a public safety issue, we have a history of cooperating with federal authorities in investigations. So, yes.
Randy, that lawful deportation order is probably from an administrative tribunal with Immigration Services. They issue deportation orders every week, and they do have the due process procedures involved. I've had some of those notices and things that go along with the protocols with that. So I would make that assumption too. If it's an actual order from an administrative tribunal that's a real law-trained judge issuing a deportation order, there wouldn't be any hesitation on anybody in sheriff, police, whoever the local law enforcement office is, picking up on that and assisting. But that's after the due process, after the hearings, after the things that we would like to take for granted. And that's what's kind of blown apart in some of these other cities, is it hasn't always happened. What you want to take for granted, if it's getting excused because people think they can make executive orders and skip the courts, and I believe there's some belief in some of the departments out there that they don't necessarily want to hear what a court thinks about this. Those blow up in your face. Around here, if something comes down from Cedar Rapids or Des Moines and it's a tribunal deportation order, we're going to read it, we're going to enforce it, we're going to assist. We don't have any reason not to, because we've already understood those things that it took to get to that point. And you're right, those are precursors to what you would expect to see in that order. And some of the people in the audience probably don't realize that you were the chief of police for a long time, so you're speaking from experience also. So,
yeah, there's certainly a difference between that and a detainer.
Yeah.
That is asked of a sheriff who in Iowa is in charge of our jails.
Yeah.
Is simply asking them to hold the person until the immigration authorities can come down and pick them up for deportation process or whatever. So there is flexibility there for local authorities to say, no, we're not going to recognize this detainer, so we won't keep the person any longer than what they're ordered to be released. So there's a difference between the deportation orders versus the detention order. Or,
you bet.
So retainers. So I just wanted to know if, and I can't foresee that happening here in Fairfield, but if it should happen, if they do have the deportation order, that law enforcement would assist, not in the enforcement of the deportation, but merely cooperating with them to help keep the area safe for everyone involved. Because everyone has the right to protest peacefully.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Randy.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much.
All right, thank you for the good questions today. And like I say, we're learning as we're going also. But things that have to do with legislation and things that have to do with our council committees and so forth, you're welcome to come to the committee meetings. They're posted, and this gets more discussion than you probably realize. And the idea is it's probably going to keep on going for quite a while. So have some trust and confidence in what we're thinking about every week as far as your local government, but also every day as far as your law enforcement and so forth. They're trying to watch out for everybody's rights, and that's a tough job. So,
Great. Thank you very much.
thank you, guys.
Thank you all for being here.